Yan. Hello po. Ang umaga sa ito ay for LGU Joman lang. But then we extend the invitation to other IAS sa Mimaropa. Kasi nga po ay yung struggle namin is struggle din ng ibang IAS ng sa Mimaropa. So kaya gusto namin i-enrich din kung ano yung mga kung ano yung matutunan namin dito, kung ano mga takeaways para ma-apply namin sa aming mga day-to-day activities or sa aming internal audit engagements. So yun, thank you din po sa lahat ng mga department heads nandito ng LGU Jongan. So ang aming pong mayor, si Mayor Trina Formalo Fabic po is nasa official travel. Ngayon. So ayun po. So before po tayo mag-start, syempre, stretching po muna tayo. Meron po ba tayong katabi dyan? Tapikin po muna natin sila. Gising ka pa ba? No? Tanungin nyo kumusta ang Valentine's nila. No? Nag-Valentine's date ba sila kahapon? Umatid ng Odiongan Got Talent? So, kamustahin natin sila. Ayan. So bago ko po ipakilala ang ating speaker, gusto ko muna kunin ang inyong salubin. So magbibigay po kami ng link dito, Menti. Yeah. So isi-send po namin yung link sa Zoom meeting. Yeah. Then isi-share din po namin para makita po namin kung ano po yung mga ang inyong yan. One thing that comes to mind about today's training. So ayan po. Quality daw, quality. Sige po. Iba po kaya? Ayan, may pumapasok na. Policies, standard, control, innovation, and competencies. Compliance standard. Magandang discussion nga yan. Sige, ituloy-tuloy nyo lang po, no? I-type nyo lang po kung ano yung kung ano yung naiisip nyo today. Sige po. Papakilala ko na po ang ating speaker for today's webinar. So, ang ating speaker ngayong umaga, no? This morning, we are privileged to have an internal audit practitioner with an impressive and extensive experience in the field for 9 years. So, magkaedad lang po kami nito. Kaso po kaming bata at nasa kalendaryo pa din. On a serious note, she worked with 2 of the top 1,000 companies in the Philippines and is currently an audit supervisor. She graduated from Far Eastern University, Philippines with a Bachelor of Science in Commerce, major in internal auditing, magna cum laude. Uh, she ha she has international certifications such as certification in asset management by the Institute of Asset Management, Bristol, United Kingdom, in March 2018, and certified ISO 9001:2015 QMS lead auditor passer uh, by CQI and IRCA, BSI Manila, Philippines in January 2019. She passed one of the hardest certification in June 2019, certified internal auditor by the Institute of Internal Auditors, Florida, USA, which very few had accomplished. Recently, in January 2023, she has a certified in cybersecurity by the International Information System Security Certification Consortium Incorporated in USA. To my boss, co-captain in the Campus Crusade for Christ Leadership Training Institute in 2010. So para, para po kaming co-captain during this period, college po kami dito. I think second year college po kami dito noon. Certified internal auditor, certified in cybersecurity. Let us welcome Miss Jacqueline Layugan po. Hello po, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. Ayan. So, thank you, Ivan. Nakaka-pressure yung introduction mo.
Hello,
everyone. So, it is really a pleasure and honor po na ma-invite dito, no. Actually, I really did not expect it, no. One day na lang nag-chat si Ivan and ayun, nag-ask siya if I could share our practices, no, on how we do our internal audits. Of course, this is for private sector, but I hope na you will also learn a lot about how we do things in the private sector. So, yeah. So basically, that's it. Maybe I can share the presentation, Ivan, or would it be your side?
Kami na lang po, ma'am. No, naka-prepare na rin.
Okay.
Sige, thank you.
Okay, sige. So, yan. So, okay. So, I think let's start with the learning objectives for today's session. So, for this session, no, we wanted to know more about the definition of internal audit and what is the value of the internal audit function. Why in the first place we are here to audit our processes no, in the government or the offices that we belong to. And then we are also here to obtain the basic understanding of the importance of the risk and controls in auditing. What is really the relationship with of the risk and internal controls when it comes to auditing? And then we are also here to understand the entire audit process and the common techniques that is used to carry out the engagement. And finally, I hope that all of us will be equipped to perform an internal audit engagement after the session. Okay, so for our session outline, I just kept it really simple. On the next slide. Yeah, okay. So on the next slide, as you can see, we will just be discussing first a short introduction about internal audit and what is internal audit's value for today. And then next is a risk and internal controls. So we will shortly discuss some terms and concepts about risk and internal controls. And then finally, we will dig deep to the core of the internal audit process, mainly focusing on engagement planning and execution, you know, for this session. Because usually tools and techniques in internal auditing were a two-day seminar, but we will attempt to do this in 1 hour. Okay, so I hope na with the time that we have, marami tayong learnings na makukuha. Okay, so let's start right away with the definition of internal auditing. So as you can see here, internal auditing is an independent and objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operation. So when we say independent and objective, it is similar and different at the same time. When we talk about independence, it talks about the internal audit department as a function. So it has to be independent with the process that we are auditing. For example, we are not part of the supply chain management process. We are fully independent in the supply chain management process. We are fully independent in the accounting management process. So when we say objective naman, this talks more about the internal auditor. So he or she should be free from bias, conflict of interest, and many more. So that's the main difference between the two. And of course, our goal is to add value and improve the organization's operation. And then internal auditing also helps the organization to accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. So highlighting here the word evaluate. So we are not present to audit the processes that we selected just to evaluate and say, are you compliant or non-compliant? No? Our next goal is actually to improve. No? So that's the core meaning of internal auditing. It's actually always evaluate and improve because we wanted to add value to the organization. Okay, so on the next slide. Yeah. So internal auditors then and now. So then we are no longer the police. No. Today we are now the management advisor. So we believe that we are a function or a professional that can give the management or the higher offices an well-informed advice. And then we are no longer the fault finder because we are now partners to our process owners in obtaining their objectives. And we are no longer feared upon, and we are already viewed as a friend of the process owners. So we are, whenever we come for an audit, so the process owner will feel comfortable, and that's our vision. No? We feel comfortable, and sometimes they will be the ones to request for an audit. No, it's not us announcing ourselves na pwede po ba namin kayong i-audit like that. No? So now it's the process owners who asks for these audits na. So the next one is we are no longer the necessary evil. Sometimes, or I'm not sure if it's still happening on the other sectors or government offices, but usually they use internal auditors to push yung mga workers nila to comply to a certain agenda or certain project that they are advocating. So now we are already a valued resource. We are already just like I said earlier, to come in their processes and see if we have something to propose as areas for improvement. And then we are no longer the one who blames and pins down mistakes and an authoritative image. No, ito I'm sure na this is long non-existent na for us, because we are already, or internal auditing function has already established its reputation to as an advocate for improvement and as an advocate of a function that values customer inputs. So we are no longer the one saying, ay, ma'am, sir, mali po yan kasi ito po yung dapat. So it's more on, we have to do this because I think this can improve your process, and I think this can elevate the efficiency of your process by this percentage. So that's how we evolved from the traditional auditing now to being close to an advisor or a consultant in our selected process. Okay, so on the next slide. Okay, so this is just a parang public material, we've got it from Protivity and Deloitte, So first on the triangle area. So our triad of value, no? See, internal audit daw, our value comes from giving threefold elements, which is assurance, advice, and anticipate. So assurance, which means that we give assurance to the company or the offices that we've been into, to see if we have already mitigated the truly greatest risks. And then the core processes are functioning very well, and that the three lines model is set up. And then we are also giving assurance that the controls are effective, and the design of this control is implemented very well. So ultimately, our goal is to aid the decision governance of our higher management or higher offices. As to the advice, usually we come in during change, because whenever we implemented a new system, a new project, so sometimes it is the auditors, no, who comes in first and check if it is really okay, or if the implementation of this change would pose no threat to the achievement of our overall objectives. So it's still actually anchored actually in achieving the objectives of our overall organization strategy. And then we also give advice whenever there is a new technology that is planned to be implemented, and some three lines model enhancements. So later on, I will show you what the three line model is. And then for anticipate, so anticipate because we anticipate the risk, no, that is emerging outside the scope of our audit universe. For example, are there disruptive technologies, no, that can affect our operations, or are there emerging risks, no, that can really affect, no, the achievement of our objectives. So one sample of this is the pandemic, no. Many really ignored the pandemic risk, no, that happens. Lagi yang nasa last line ng mga risk registers natin, but come 2020, I think, no, umakyat siya, no, from the bottom of the list, pumunta siya sa top, because many of our organizations in the private sector really just laughed about pandemic risk. So our role as internal auditors is really to scan this risk, identify, you know, what are the emerging risks, what are the disruptive technologies, and this is where we can add value. This is where we can say to the management, sir, ma'am, we have to prepare for this one, no, because it may be happening likely in the near future. So ganyan. So that is our value. And then the circle that you can see below is actually the next generation internal audit, or something that we wanted the internal audit to become. So from governance to methodology, it introduces a lot of high level or innovative perspective and principles now when it comes to auditing. And as you can see in the enabling technology section, no, that we aim or we envision that the internal audits would be the ones, no, who can propagate the use of machine learning or artificial intelligence, process mining, automation, advanced analytics. So continuous monitoring for us is we're still in the process of setting up, no, how to do continuous auditing or continuous monitoring. But yes, we really have to build our competency, and of course prepare our process owners, no, when we wanted to attempt to use this technology to evolve then our audit services. Anyways, let's move to the scope of internal audit. So basically, the scope of internal audit is covering governance, risk management, and controls. No, sometimes it is called compliance, no, for other sectors, no, but for private sectors, it's really about controls, no, because we mainly combine compliance and control into one element. So under governance, internal audit wants to ensure that there is appropriate management oversight in place. No, is the review of our processes, the transactions that we have set up, no, yung review approvals or the approval hierarchy, etc. The tone of the top. So is it really the vision and mission of our organization? Is it really communicated to all of the levels of our entity? So that's what we see or what we check in under the governance element. In risk management, we are here to ensure that risk management is effective. So I'm not really sure about the government sector, no, but in the private sector, we are really crazy about risk management, no, especially after the pandemic happened, after the Taal explosion happened, no, our sector, no, the energy sector, no, really pushed, the risk management to evolve because no, we really cannot prepare, and because we are in power, no, we cannot just say na walang operations, no. There are many establishments that needs energy, especially the hospitals, the schools, no. So they will be very affected, no, if our services really stop, no. So that's why we really focus on risk management. And then on the controls, so we are here to evaluate the adequacy and the effectiveness of the control and to determine the level of compliance related to policies and procedures, as well as the compliance with the regulatory standards and legal requirements, no. I think one thing that I can relate to your office is that energy industry is very highly regulated. So we have so many laws, regulations, and how do you call this, compliance obligations to follow. So that's why compliance is also our great agenda. Okay. So okay pa bang lahat? Baka masyado ng maraming info yung nabibigay ko. Are we still good? Okay. So maybe we can move to the next. Ayan. So this is the IIA's three-line model. So in this three-line model, this is actually, yes, thank you, Sarah. So this is actually just a depiction on how internal audit moves, or what is the relationship of internal audit to the following parties, no. So in the three lines model, the first line is actually the management, no. Ito yung mga process owners na in-audit natin. So the actions that they are taking is to manage the risk, no. They function as the risk owners, and they are also the frontliners to achieve our objectives, no, organizational objectives. So that's the management. The second line that you can see under the management box is actually yung mga supporting roles like risk management, compliance management ng mga departments, legal. So that's where they belong to. So they are actually the first party to check if the first line of defense or the line management is doing their jobs, no. And then the arrows that you can see there represents the relationship, no. And between the management and internal audit, there is a horizontal arrow. So meaning the relationship that we have to the management is more on alignment, communication, coordination, and collaboration. That's why we do our audits there, because we wanted to communicate, no, the best practice that we can offer to them. We wanted to coordinate in order for us to craft very effective corrective actions, no, for every findings that we report to them, and collaborate as well. So we wanted to liaise with them to follow up what is the status of the agreements that we have to the process owners in terms of the resolution of our audit findings. So the third big box that you can see there is the governing body. So in the private sector, this would be the board Okay, so the board, but I'm not sure for the private sector. As for the government sector, maybe this will be the highest office that you have in your own municipalities. Maybe this is the mayor's office or the governor's office. But then our relationship with them is more on accountability and reporting. No? We wanted to report to them the highlights lang, no, not all, but what we see as the very important subject matters to address, no, immediately. And then in turn, governing body will have a downward arrow or relationship with the management and the internal audit because they wanted to also delegate and direct, no, these two great boxes so that we can align with the strategy or the vision that they have in mind. So that is the relationship between the three parties. And as you can see here, there is an external assurance provider area here. So in the private sector, this would be our regulators, no, yung mga government agency that we adhere to, and of course the external auditors in here. So they are still part of the universe. However, they are not part of the system, no. So, but we collaborate with them and we liaise with them if ever they need to come in our three lines model system and improve then our processes. But basically, this model focuses more on the relationship between the governing body, internal audit, and the management. Okay. So that's all about internal audit function now. But now we can discuss more about risk and internal controls. So in here, this is a diagram that I really love to share, you know, during my tawag dito, opening meeting with the process owners, no. But this is actually from BSI, and this is meant for discussing what is risk, you know, in terms of the business continuity perspective. But I do believe that this applies, no, to all scenarios, no, of risk, regardless if it is a business continuity risk or just a normal operation risk. So this slide shows how the risk life cycle develops, and also how the controls come in. So as you can see here, from origin of the risk to the resolution, there are controls, no, that comes to prevent those risks from escalating. So under the origin to development, we actually employ preventive controls, no, to stop the risk from developing, you know, further. So what are the samples of preventive controls? We have the policies and procedures, we have our risk management plans, our guidelines, our accounting systems or other systems that we employ, forms, no, and also approval hierarchy, no. And then but if this risk really parang hindi natin na mitigate siya, no, it really escalated pa, no, we still employ detective risk, no, so that we can know, or we can know in advance na oh my goodness, this risk is really happening. So what detective controls can we employ? Again, policies and procedures, it really covers a lot, no, and the guidelines as well. But in addition, we have whistleblowing, no, for fraud audits. We have cycle counts, no, for inventories and existence validation as well. So these are just example, no, but I'm sure na you can still come up with other detective controls, no. But yeah, so basically that's it for preventive and detective. And now the red arrow that you can see there is actually the point where the risk actually happened. So when the risk actually happened, we put on not actually a control, but actually a correction na. So we wanted to mitigate first now the immediate effect of the risk, or the immediate impact of the risk. That's why we do corrections. No, we rectify things, we adjust, we revise, no, yung mga processes natin to just mitigate temporarily kung ano yung direct impact ng risk dun sa operations natin. And when it is already it already went up to the point na medyo nagsa-subside na yung risk, medyo nagda-die down na siya, that's how we think about the corrective action na we are going to take. So the goal of corrective action is actually to prevent the risk from happening again. So that's why we do our incident reporting, our non-conformance reporting, our root cause analysis, and as a result of that, we update our policy, and we recascade our policy. We innovate our processes, and maybe we add more controls about it. So that's our goal, no, in the corrective action, because we don't want again na the risk will go up again because it has already happened again and we did nothing. So that's how the risk and internal controls work with, with each other. All right. So I will just introduce to you a framework, that we are really using in the private sector. It's called the COSO Cube. So COSO means the Committee of Sponsoring Organization of the Threadway Commission. And actually, this term really coincide with the term Sarbanes-Oxley Act, no? So parang yung birth nitong COSO Cube na to, parang din siya, close din siya, or halos kasabayan niya lang si SOX, no? Pero hindi siya masyadong matunog on the accounting sector, but in internal audit, this is really like the star, the star framework aside from the ISPPIA or the IPPF. So according to the COSO Cube or the COSO Internal Control Framework, the effective internal control system DAO has 5 elements. So we have here control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring activities. And these 5 elements actually addresses how the 3 objectives, they are designed to achieve the 3 objectives that we have in our organization. So again, this is for the private sector, but maybe this is also applicable for government. So we have our operational objectives, our reporting objectives, and our compliance objectives. And then these elements also spans across all the levels of our office or our function. So at the entity level or the highest level, up to the division level, to the operating unit, and to the individual function. So it spans across this. So when we say control environment on the next slide, so when we say control environment, this talks about governance, as I discussed earlier. This is more on the higher office or our higher management, setting the tone at the top, setting our mission, our vision, our strategic objectives, and how we view the controls that we will be executing in our offices. And then risk assessment again is mainly just the practice of identifying and assessing the risk. And then after you assess the risk, you implement controls through the control activities. And of course, the 4th element is information and communication. This mainly says that we identify the information that we are going to communicate across all the levels of the entity, and we also identify the information that we are allowed to communicate or we agreed to communicate outside our organization. And then finally, the monitoring activities. So this works to really see if we implement all the first 4 that we have. So that's where we come usually, internal audit. But to know more about the COSO internal control framework, I've added a link there. Maybe Ivan can share the presentation material later on, so it's okay. And you can read the material na lang, so that you can also know what these 17 principles that you see in the slides really means. Okay, so yeah. So with that, we move straight to the audit process. And here is a parang general flow of the audit process. The audit master plan, usually done annually, but some organizations, I think they develop a long year audit master plan and then revisit it on a yearly basis, no, if it still works, no, for them. And then the inputs would actually be the risk assessments, no, the audit and the organizational identified risk, no. It's not only our process owners who identifies risk, no. Audit can also identify risk, no, but it's not for the purpose of of adding those risks in their risk registers, but for the purpose of our audit lang. So also another input is the management request. As mentioned earlier, the management is now really viewing the internal audit as an important function. So that's why they are the ones na who requests the internal audit to come to a specific department. And then the updating of our audit universe. So usually we identify ano yung mga auditable units na pwede nating i-check at the span of 1 year. So, and if there is a need to update, so we update it also, no. And then after considering all of those, we do our audit prioritization. So now, after selecting yung audits na iti-take natin, we come with the engagement planning. So for this session, I will just focus more on engagement planning and engagement execution. But actually, after engagement planning, you do your execution, and then after that, you report to the various level of management. So for the private sector, we do the line management, the middle management, which is actually the COO, CEOs, and then the last line would be our board audit com or the steer committee. So that's how we do our reporting. And then for the monitoring, so hindi nagtatapos yung audit after reporting, no. After some time, we come back to the process owners, at the agreed date, that they said during the meetings, the closing meetings that we have, and then see if they have already implemented the commitments or the action plans that they said to us, during the reporting stage. So that's how monitoring works. And if hanggat hindi nako-close yung audit item, hindi tayo titigil sa pag-liaise o sa pag-collaborate with the process owners in terms of this one. Because if we leave it open, so there is a chance now that the risk will happen again, or the risk will actually happen. Yun. So, yun siya. So, before we move to prelim survey, so balik tayo sa engagement planning. So, engagement letter preparation, I just included it here because some of our process owners, they prefer na they have a formal talaga na announcement na the audit will come at this time period, we cover this scope. So usually we add this engagement letter as part of our engagement planning activities before we start everything, before we start the preliminary survey, the risk assessment, etc. Before we although we already identify our objectives and the initial scope, but then it will be finalized soon after we do our other preliminary activities. But yeah, so I just wanted to highlight the engagement letter preparation, and I'm not sure if you also do this practice as well. So yun, I just wanted to highlight it. So maybe we can move to the preliminary survey on the next slide. Ayan. So on the preliminary survey, so the purpose of this activity is actually for the auditors to become familiar with the process and the purpose of the process. So why is accounting there? What is their function? Bakit ba sila nandyan? Or si supply chain, bakit ba sila nandyan? Ano talaga yung importance nila to our office or to our organization? And then we also wanted to be familiar with the existing risk and concerns in the engagement area that we wanted to audit. And then the next bullet that you can see here is to solicit inputs and comments with the stakeholders, because sometimes when we prepare our audit procedures, we think of a lot of risks that is likely to happen. But when we come to the process owner, minsan tumatawa lang sila na hindi na namin risk yan. hindi naman na namin masyadong inaalala yan ngayon. So it is important na before we actually do our field work, actually execute our audit, we have already gathered those kinds of inputs to the process owners and incorporate it in our engagement plans. So finally, which is the most important talaga, is to gather, yun nga, ang sabi ko kanina, is to gather information necessary to craft our engagement work program. So basically, we wanted to have a engagement program that is initially strong na, strong na in terms of the coverage of the risk that and controls that we wanted to test, and also the important points that the stakeholder or the process owners really wanted to see in our report. Maybe the process owner sometimes say na medyo hindi ako sure kung strong ba yung process ko sa warehousing or sa procurement, so baka pwede mo namang i-check. So in the preliminary survey, we already have the idea na okay, so the process owner wanted an assessment of this particular process. So maybe we can add more resources or add more people to look into this process because the process owners wanted it. And also we agree, we see that it makes sense then, so may balancing yun. Hindi pwedeng inputs lang talaga ni stakeholder. We also want to balance everything. Baka kasi mamaya yung request nila is something lang pala to divert the internal audit onto something that really is a red flag, or really a process that is really not working. So ganon. So we still have to balance. That's why again we do this preliminary survey. So in the inputs, so we get the inputs of the stakeholders. We do preliminary interviews or questionnaires, but I will discuss that later on na lang. And then we also look into their risk registers. By the way, Ivan and the rest, do you have risk registers in your offices din ba?
Sa amin po, wala pong risk register. Pero po sa ibang LGU, like kasama po natin dito from Provincial Government of Occidental Mindoro, meron po silang risk register po.
Okay. So it's okay lang naman. Okay. So if we don't have risk register, so it is really important to know yung mga policies and procedures nila. And for us internal auditors to really benchmark in the internet or in the other government offices, what are the risks that they consider in their similar processes na in-audit nila. If we don't have risk register, so it's okay lang din naman. So we also do observations, and during walkthrough, we sometimes go sa process owner and witness a transaction happening. Just witness, walang tanong, walang just really seeing how it really works, parang ganyan. And also, this is really important and often neglected, the prior audit reports and other available documents. So usually, pag repeating na yung audit, nakakalimutang tignan yung audit reports kasi baka mamaya may mga open findings pa pala, o kaya merong tendency sila na mag-repeat nung same mistakes in an interval. So we also have to consider the audit reports than the prior years, and also the other available documents like their POs, their policies and procedures, and ano pa ba? And then yung mga mandates nila, yung mga plans nila and targets nila, or the KPIs that they have. So our output for preliminary survey is actually a process map. We will be discussing that later on. Audit checklist, or mainly your audit procedures and the preliminary results and observations. Sometimes sa preliminary survey pa lang meron ka ng findings. So be sure na you note it, you document it at that stage pa lang, kasi usually pag marami ka nang tinitignan during your field work or execution, medyo nakakalimutan na siya. So we have to document it. So getting inputs from stakeholders on the next slide. So again, we are concerned about knowing what is considered valuable audit result in the perspective of the process owners. So we are also concerned about what risks or the part of the processes they are most concerned of, as mentioned earlier, and where do they need the help, the most. Sometimes internal audit is also a way for them to convince the higher offices na we need more manpower because we really can't do or we really can't achieve our objectives, because we are konti lang, ganyan. So yun, we get those input from the stakeholders, but we do not promise anything, no. We just listen to them, note their inputs, and then eventually during the audit execution we find evidence to support what these inputs are, no. So kung talaga nakikita natin na really yung root cause nitong audit finding na to is manpower, wala talaga silang manpower, then that's the time we put it in the report and say the root cause is people, is lack of people or lack of system. So that's how it looks like. So yeah, that's all for getting inputs from stakeholders. And then we have risk management on the next slide, or risk assessment actually, sorry. So on the next slide. So some terminologies here. So risk, again, kanina natin pinag-uusapan, but the definition is actually an event that may impact the objectives of the area or the process that we are reviewing. So it's more likely just something that impact the objective. So yun yung keyword, no. So if it is something that hinders achievement of the objective, then that is a risk. So yun. So usually it is expressed in terms of likelihood and impact. And then meron lang akong maliit na diagram here. So inherent risk is actually the risk in absence of the controls. So in the internal audit activity, mainly on the preliminary survey, we are more concerned about identifying the inherent risk muna. So we are not yet considering the controls, no. Meron kasi minsan pag sinabi namin ay risk nyo po yung mawalan kayo ng stock. Magagalit yung process owner saying na full stock kami. Paano namin naging risk yun? Nag-replenish kami every time. So the act of replenishing on time is actually the control. But the inherent risk is still there, no? Kasi yun talaga yung inherent risk, no? At without the controls, these are the risks that is present. So we have to identify those risks pa rin, even if we see that the process owner is really good in implementing the controls, because we want a fresh perspective kasi. So that's why we are really concerned about inherent risk. And then the residual risk, this usually comes na after the engagement execution. That's how we will assess, no, how much residual risk na lang yung napupunta sa is it really tolerable na, okay na to sa process owner na may ganito lang tayong amount of risk. So that usually comes after the audit execution na. So and then the controls, again, these are the activities to mitigate risk. So usually yung expression ng risk is that vulnerability is equal to likelihood times impact, where the likelihood is measured first, no, or either in terms of probability or frequency of occurrence from historical data. So pwede tayong mag-estimate lang with probability, or pwede rin tayong mag-measure in terms of frequency kasi meron na tayong historical data. So ayun lang yung mini niya. On the next slide, you can see there a sample of a impact criteria, no, that the private sector again uses, no. Usually kasi nung bago-bago pa lang akong auditor, ang alam ko lang na impact is actually yung financial impact, no. If the possible loss will reach this amount, so then it is a 1, parang ganon. If it is this amount, then it is a 5, no. But as I go through the audit, no, and see how risk management and audit evolves, no, meron na palang ibang mga criteria like health and safety, and then environmental criteria, meron ding ESG or social cultural criteria, or reputation minsan, and then meron din tayo legal criteria. So all of those, no, this is really set by our organization or our higher management office, no, and after setting those levels, they cascade it to down the line so that they can also apply, no, yung criteria, no, in terms of impact. And then in terms of likelihood on the next slide. Okay. So in likelihood, again, we can measure it through frequency, especially if meron na tayong historical data. Halimbawa, we are measuring the likelihood of an earthquake happening. So of course that data is available. So we can measure that through frequency. But if we do not have any reliable data, we use the probability, no. So likelihood, pwedeng siya in terms of percentage yung expression niya, or in terms of of whatever of a descriptor actually, if it is possible, probable, unlikely, rare. So ganyan yung pwede nating gamitin. So actually wag niyo lang siyang gayahin, no. I just got this from Google, no, but I really recommend, no, if you wanted to express your likelihood by frequency, you don't use parang criteria na sobrang layo gaya nito, no, 25 years to 1 month. It's really sobrang layo. So we have to recalibrate everything, no. And of course, this has to be reviewed then by and agreed by all of the departments or function heads then. Ayan. So basically that's how you do risk assessment. But on the next slide, I just want to show you an example of how inherent risk assessment is done in the audit perspective. So this is a hypothetical risk. So we have stuck out risk. So the definition is that this risk is the stoppage of operation due to non-availability of critical spares to deliver the service. So for example, meron spares for example, we can imagine a factory, and then yung spare na yun, siya yung critical para ma-move yung mga conveyor from the first production line down to the next. So dahil hindi siya makapag-move, nag-stop yung operation. So that's why we call it stuck out risk, no? Kasi yung spare na yun, hindi natin siya mapalitan on time. So that's why we have to procure it, and then hintayin pa natin siya ng matagal bago ulit mag-resume yung operation. So that's how stuck out risk works. Now, si auditor will come to do the preliminary survey and see if there are process owner identified risk, no, o yung mismong SCM department or procurement department or the warehouse or the operations department identified na this risk in the first place. So we look into their risk registers and see if meron silang na-identify. So in this case, no, nakikita natin na wala siya sa strategic risk, which is yung sa high level, yung sa high office. So okay lang, wala. So we step a level down and see yung mga operational risk registers nila. And in here, you can see na dun sa SCM, yung supplier risk daw is, this is a related risk, no, not actually or exactly the stuck out risk, but it is related. So the auditor considered it. So ang supplier risk and low yung kanyang assessment dito. And then sa operations department naman, nakita natin na may stuck out risk din sila. So we capture that information and put it in here and deliberate if mag-a-agree ba tayo sa assessment nila. And then on the other side of the table, you can see there risk drivers, no. Usually risk drivers is just the causes and threats, no, that enable the risk to happen. So in here, the auditor identified na in order for stuck out risk to happen, so this has to be existent, no. First, hindi daw nila in-identify yung critical spares nila. So meaning to say, hindi nila nakita na ito yung mga spares na dapat pala laging available at site kasi anytime pwede silang masira, and kapag nasira sila, masyado silang matagal bago ma-procure ulit. Kasi baka mamaya malayo pala yung supplier. So it takes 6 months for us to have the spares delivered from our facility or our site. So next is the non-monitoring of inventory levels. Baka pala si warehouse, hindi talaga siya nag-i-inventory, hindi niya ina-update yung mga documents. So when we thought na meron pang when we thought about when we thought na meron pang spares, yun pala wala na. Ayun. So next is the lack of alternate suppliers. What if kaya naman nating ma-procure siya on time, like within 3 days with our original supplier, but then wala silang stock at that time and we do not have any accredited suppliers nearby. So that's also a risk driver. So next is the pandemic. This is really true for us, no? Yung pandemic and natural disasters na influences the spares delivery, because as you know, no, yung mga power plants hindi sila located sa city, no? They are located in a very remote areas. So when the pandemic hit and the typhoon Odette hit, no, so medyo nahirapan kami dito on this one. So medyo ang hirap ng logistics. So meaning to say, these are the possible scenarios that could contribute to the stockout risk from happening. So the auditors identified that and they come up with the risk assessment down below. So in this case, sabi ni auditor, likely daw to happen yung stockout risk kasi ang main driver is the natural disaster kasi frequent daw yung typhoons. So yan yung kanyang justification sa kanyang likelihood. And then her impact, no, hindi siya nag-use ng financial impact in this case. Ginamit niya yung operational because she said na yung disruption would be estimated for more than 2 weeks. So sa kanya, high na yun siya. So the next step of this one, for example, not just this risk, no, meron pa siyang mga na-identify na iba. So he or she will go to the process owners yan and proceed to the inherent risk calibration. So in the inherent risk calibration, first, again, we will look into the strategic or the organizational level na risk registers and then the departmental risk registers and come up with the list of audit owner identified na risk registers and assessment. And then on the other side, pag meron pa tayo nakikitang mga inherent risk pero hindi nila na consider, we also put it, no, so dun sa audit identified natin na risk. And then the process owner and the audit will meet for an inherent risk calibration. So during this inherent risk calibration, we discuss this risk, no? Does this make sense? No, is our risk rating, no, yung likelihood and yung impact really is agreeable for both parties? So if yes, then so okay tayo doon. But if no, we listen to the process owners and adjust, no, our risk assessment ratings, no? Because the results of this inherent risk calibration will be the baseline for our review of the controls na, yung mga itetest na natin, yung crafting na natin ng mga audit procedures. So this is just a parang added it might seem tedious, no, but if you have enough time to set up this kind of practice, no, it will really be valuable for you in terms of planning, no, the internal audit team, kasi alam niyo lang kung ano yung mga risk na ipa-prioritize niyo. And for the process owners kasi minsan matututunan nila kung na meron palang risk na ganito na dapat din naming i-monitor, parang ganun. So it really benefits both sides. Okay. So after risk assessment, punta na tayo sa controls identification, no, which is on the next slide. And usually our tool for this activity is the risk and control matrix. And as you can see here, this is just a how do you call this? A very simple format of the risk control and control matrix. But usually hindi lang yan inherent risk, risk drivers, and key controls. No? Usually, meron pa yung control objectives, meron pa yung main process or parent risk, mga ganyan. So, just for the sake of this session, this is a very simple na representation of the risk and control matrix. So again, medyo favorite ko ang supply chain. So so all throughout this session, no, magsa-supply chain tayo. And as you can see here daw, yung ginawa ni auditor dito, so per process, nag-identify siya ng inherent risk, no? And after doing the risk calibration, eto na lang yung mga risk na napag-agrihan nila ng audit team na ifo-focus nila, kunwari, no? Of course, there are other risks, no? Pero for that particular audit, ito lang yung priority nila. Okay. So, under inherent risk, we have under the PO process, PRPO process, the loss of competitive advantage daw. Meaning to say, the risk na nag-procure sila ng item na hindi siya cost efficient. So they thought about the risk drivers, and the flags that you can see there is actually a red flag, no? The auditors are actually mandated to identify possible red flags, no, where an opportunity of a fraud might happen. So hindi natin sinasabi na red flag is may fraud na agad, no. Meron lang possible occurrence of fraud or pwedeng magkaroon ng fraud dito kasi existing tong situation na to. So let's look at the risk drivers, no? Yung una na lang, you can just digest na the other two later on. So first is using the wrong sourcing strategy. For example, instead of bidding yung ginawa niya for the item, ginawa niya direct sourcing. So we raise it as a red flag kasi baka mamaya may collusion na pala or nakakontrata na pala, naka-personal kontrata na pala si buyer doon sa supplier na yon. Kaya instead na ipabid niya yung items, for example, purchase of 100 unit of laptops, no, ginawa niya direct sourcing na lang. So the next one is bid rigging. So ibig sabihin nagpabid nga siya, kaso may kinontrata na rin siyang bidder, and yun na yung parang predetermined na mananalo sa bid. And then next is the lack of management control, no, over the approval ng procurement. So meaning to say, hindi na siya dumadaan properly sa approval talaga ng mga boss natin and the higher management, no, if it is really a big purchase, no. Minsan dapat mag-escalate siya. And then after identifying the risk drivers, as you can see here, in-identify na ni auditor kung ano yung mga key controls na dapat na nakikita niya na makakapag-mitigate doon sa risk driver na yon from happening. So as you can see on the risk driver number 1, nag-identify siya ng isang control, which is a guideline daw, no, for the buyers to know when will they use the competitive bidding strategy, the sole sourcing strategy, or the repeat order strategy. So with that, no, hindi na kailangan mag-isip ni approver if etong purchase pa na to dapat competitive bidding to or dapat sole sourcing. So ganyan. So ganyan siya. So the next naman sa risk driver number 2, yung bid rigging, nag-identify siya ng dalawang control. So first is yung for competitive bidding daw, dapat meron siyang minimum of 3 bidders. Pag 3 valid bidders to so meaning to say, pwede siyang magkuha ng invite na marami, pero dapat yung makuha niyang nag-respond sa invite niya is actually the minimum of 3. No? So yun yung kanyang guideline. So the next control that she identified here is that bid quotations daw shall be subject to technical evaluation by the end users o yung requester nung item na pinopurchase, and commercial evaluation by the procurement and the bidding committee. If this is a big purchase, now we involve the bidding committee na. So ayan, so yan yung kanyang control for the bid rigging. So next is the lack of management control over the procurement approval. So ang na-identify niya dito na control will be the establishment of the PO approval hierarchy. So meaning to say, approval hierarchy is just setting up na for halimbawa 1 peso to 100,000 amount, si ano lang to, kaya na tong mag-proceed if approved siya ni SCM, ni procurement department manager. Pero kapag 500,000 na and above, dapat si ano na to, si sino pa ba? Si function head or sino ba yung next? So for us no, si division head natin which is si SCM, vice president na. But if it is a big purchase na, like we are talking about millions and 10 millions and above, so we have to involve na the highest management or the CEO, COO or our mayor's office, mga ganyan. So that's how approval hierarchy works. So yun. So after that, the next step, this key controls na, yan may talking bubble ako dyan, will be the base of your audit procedures and the work programs. Because you have already clearly identified the risk drivers and the key controls, you now know how to audit this risk kasi alam mo na yung mga controls na hanapin mo tapos gagawan mo na lang siya ng audit procedure. So that's how risk and control matrix works. Okay. So after that, nagawa mo na lahat, nakapag-inherent risk assessment ka na, and nakapag-identify ka na rin ng key controls, that's now the time for you and your team to create an engagement work program. So engagement work program is just a document that lists the audit procedures, that is to be followed during the engagement. So ayan, so it should be also approved by the audit head, in our case, the audit head or the audit manager. So I'm not sure if ano yung equivalent niya sa inyo, but it has to be reviewed and approved, Hindi pwedeng si audit team lead lang yung nag-craft, then go na tayo. So yun, so it has to be reviewed and approved then. So next, yung core components daw ng engagement work program is actually yung scope and details. We have the engagement objective, and then we also attach the risk and control matrix, and then the availability of resources. For example, how many days are we going to spend for this type of engagement? Do we still use dyan nasa next part? Ata yan. Yung left side lang is parang naggawa lang ako ng hypothetical work program dun sa initial natin na results earlier sa risk control matrix. So this is how it looks like in actual for me in practice for us. So yan. So yung availability ng essential resources niya, the audit schedule, virtual meeting requirements because this is a hybrid remote setup. So sabi niya dito, kailangan internet connection, noise cancelling headphones, tapos smartphones para kapag walang internet, mag-voice call na lang. So ganyan. So remote audit feasibility, this is our practice, We come to the audit, to the process owners and give a form, or a online form, and then mag-survey lang kami if may mga questions lang kami doon na, is your internet okay? Are you suffering from intermittent internet connection? Ganyan. So yung mga target namin na process owner na i-audit for that time, yun yung sinisendan namin. And then pag na-receive namin yung response, makikita namin doon if feasible ba sila to engage in a remote audit interaction o kailangan namin pumunta at site. So basically, yun lang yung mini-min ko dito ng audit feasibility. And then for the sample sizes, unfortunately, our time is not enough to discuss na yung sample sizes. But usually, this is just saying now our sample techniques that we use and how we came up with our samples. So in here, naglagay siya dito ng 3 different stratified samples niya. Kukuha daw siya ng 30 samples under normal PO transaction, then another 20 for the emergency PO, then another 15 for non-PO transaction. So basically, ganun lang na mga statement, Very simple lang. Very simple lang para makita lang kung yung overall talaga na flow ng ating engagement. So, and then conclusions and judgment. So, just like I said earlier, kapag meron tayong nakita during the preliminary stage na mga mga concerns na, we already log it or we already document it in our engagement work program pa lang. So in this case, hypothetically, ang nakita daw ni auditor is that wala pa silang masyadong SCM policy. So ongoing pa lang yung writing niya. So ano yung resolution ni auditor? So in absence of a internal guidelines, so gagawin niya na lang is magbe-benchmark na lang siya sa internet daw ng mga SCM internal controls at saka mga possible restrictment actions related sa procurement. So yun yung kanyang resolution. So yan, after that, they presented it to the audit head, and if approved, they can now proceed to the how do you call this, to the audit, audit proper na. But just, yes, next slide please. So just run through of the other elements of the engagement planning. So we have to identify our audit objectives, just a broad statement na defining our intended engagement outcomes. For assurance activity, so need natin i-reflect yung or i-consider yung results ng preliminary assessment, no? But for consulting, diretso tayo sa commenting about the governance, risk management, and control processes. So ayun lang siya. For the audit scope, again, these are just boundaries, no, for the auditors, no, to know where are the limits, no. Although we have already identified our priority risks, no, there is still a tendency for us to dig deep dun sa subject matter and maghanap talaga tayo intentionally ng fraud, mga ganyan, no. So with the audit scope, no, we as the internal auditors are guided, no, when to proceed and when to stop. So yun yung pinaka-importance ng audit scope. Okay, so on the next slide, audit criteria is actually just the criteria that you will use, no, yung in coming up with your audit findings. This can be in the form of industry standard, for example, the ISO, or the best practices or the regulations actually for your process area, so ganyan. So pwede rin namang mga mga standards and practices from professional organizations like ano ba ano ba yung nasa akin? Kasi ang naiisip ko lang talaga is internal audit, Institute of Internal Audit. So yun. So that's we can use that as an audit criteria. Sometimes we also use the COSO, yung kanina yung inano ko sa inyo, yung pinresent ko sa inyo kanina. So we use also that for as our audit criteria. And then for the staff and resources, we should also the team leader of your of your audit. So she or he has to plan for the audit staff availability and competency, especially if you are a big group, no. Kami 17 kami sa group, and it's really hard for us to plan for the resources, no. Sino kayang magiging available at this moment in time. And then you also have to consider the training needs. Baka kasi management request to, and wala pa sa internal audit team ang merong expertise to look into, for example, information security. So we have to consider also if we need some trainings, no, before really accepting this how do you call this engagement. And then time resources, again, for the Mondays, meaning to say the time we will spend for the audit, and as well as the process owner availability. This is especially so for accounting, no. We have to I'm not sure for the government offices, no, but for private sector, no, they have their closing periods. So we have to make sure na yung timing ng engagement natin medyo malayo dun sa time na talagang busy season sila. So we have to be considerate to also check, no, their availability. So next is of course the others, yung finance needs, no. Is there any need for a travel or a meal allowance? Is there need for a PPE, is personal protective equipment? So kailangan ba ng safety shoes, ng hard hat, ganyan? Or kailangan ba natin ng access dun sa system nila, for example sa accounting system or sa HR system or supply chain management system. So that's how we that's what we have to consider, no, in just one audit engagement. So medyo tedious talaga siya. But it really pays a lot, no, for the smooth execution of our audit. So after that, so you have already crafted your plan, set up your criteria, objectives. So we now move to engagement execution. And as you can see there, yung kick-off meeting meron siyang asterisk, no? Usually kasi ang kick-off meeting is done uh, before the engagement execution. Pwede rin naman siyang first talaga na after the sending of the engagement letter, meron ng kick-off meeting agad. So it depends on your parang kung ano yung culture ng offices niyo, no. But in this case, no, ideally engagement at the start of the engagement executions. Okay. So for the kick-off meeting, the next slide. So this is also called opening meeting, no, for other organizations, no. But the purpose of this is to provide for the internal audit department to provide better understanding of the internal audit roles and responsibility to the process owners. This is our time to explain, no, bakit pumapasok si audit. Ano ba yung function ni audit? Ganyan. So the next is also to present our audit approaches, objectives, criteria, and scope. Yan, okay. So, and then finally, to solicit again management inputs, no. Basically, yung kinukuha natin dito is if available ba sila or agree ba sila dun sa initial schedule na sinet natin for them. So, yan lang yung for kick-off meeting. And then after that, we already proceed to the engagement. And the first thing that we will do is to gather evidence, no, for the control testings that we will have. So sabi dito, the qualities of a good audit evidence daw is to be sure. An evidence has to be sure with an R. So hindi siya napilit, guys. Pero yun, okay lang sana yan. So again, no, a good audit evidence is sufficient. And then it also has to be sufficient, meaning to say that it is factual, adequate, and convincing. So that if if your audit manager, for example, or an informed person read your audit report, he or she will also have the same conclusion as you have concluded. So ganun siya ka-sufficient. So walang doubt na oo, tama yan. Yan talaga yung mangyayari diyan. So that's our measure, no, of how sufficient our evidence is. And then useful, again, we only look for information that meets our goals, no, or the organizational goals. In our case, that meets our audit objectives, no. So yun. And then reliable, meaning to say this is the best attainable information that we can get through our appropriate engagement techniques. So take note of the meaning na appropriate. So one thing na I need to highlight here is that yung recording, for example, yung tawag dito, yung recording of your interview without consent. So that is actually considered na ngayon as illegal because of our Data Privacy Act. So we have to be careful, no, in gathering our audit evidence. So it is the best attainable information that we can get through appropriate means or legal means. So that's one thing that I wanted to highlight. And then next should be the evidence should be relevant, no. It really supports our engagement observation. Hindi siya nagsusupport sa ibang controls, no. It's just directly hitting our assessments for the controls, no, that we are testing. And then also it is consistent with our engagement objective. So yan, that's how we can know that our audit evidence is a good evidence. Okay? So medyo madami na ba? So let's just talk about the level of persuasiveness on the next slide, no? How persuasive the evidence is. So you can see here in my little diagram, no. So this is the hierarchy of the persuasiveness of the evidence. As you can see there, the highest level, the evidence that has the higher level of persuasiveness will be physical examination, and then followed by direct observation. The reason is that it is the auditor himself or herself who managed to obtain this information. So hindi siya gumamit ng third party, hindi siya nag-create ng other documents, no. just directly obtain the evidence. The next will be the external information, which is the third party. No, usually it is more persuasive than the other three below, because it is really hard for the internal party, which is our process owner, to how do you call this, to parang i-modify yung evidence, no. So yun, so that's why it is also high, no, in terms of persuasiveness, but not higher than the ones that were obtained directly by the auditor. So the next one is the external, internal, and internal external information. Medyo nakakalito, no, but for the external internal information, ito yung information na galing kay galing kay third party or kay external party, pinrocess lang ni process owner. For example, yung sales invoice, galing yun kay supplier, or yung billing, so galing yun kay supplier, pinrocess lang ni sino to? ni ni accounting, ganyan. So internal external naman baliktad, galing kay process owner, tapos pinrocess lang ni external party. So example naman nito is of course the PO, no. So galing sa atin, sa process owner, galing kay SCM, pinrocess lang ni third party or ni supplier. So ganun siya. So in terms of those two daw, mas mataas syempre yung galing muna kay supplier bago na process ni internal party. So and then finally yung pinaka-low with persuasiveness is the internal information, or the information that is solely coming from the process owners. So yun siya. But that does not mean na we no longer use no internal information, no, kasi sabi ni Jackie, yung internal information siya yung pinaka low in persuasiveness. No. So it just means na we still get the information from the process owner, but we have to use other types, or we have to use other types of supporting evidences to make sure na the internal information also passes our standards for quality evidence, no, sufficient, useful, reliable, and relevant. So yun lang siya. So there is another type of slide that I wanted to share, no. Ito naman yung types ng audit evidence. Actually very similar din siya dun sa nauna kanina. But in terms of type, so ito rin yung levels of persuasiveness niya. Again, the analytical information which is drawn in the consideration of the data itself and the policies and procedures. The data, meaning yung data na yun na process ni auditor. Hindi lang siya data na nabigay sa atin, then ayun na. So if yung data lang siya na nabigay sa atin, doon tayo mapupunta siya doon sa documentary information kasi hindi siya na-process at all. So if it is processed by the internal auditor himself or herself, so it becomes an analytical information. So that's why it is also placed on top as the highest possible persuasive evidence. Then physical information, as I mentioned earlier, it's just direct observation. So ganyan. So nag-inspect ka doon, nag-witness ka ng transaction, so that's physical information. So documentary information I have already discussed earlier, and testimonial information usually coming through the interviews, that we do, with our third party or process owner. So that's how it is. No, so what if naman, Jackie, kulang kami sa audit evidence, as in kulang talaga. So what are we going to do? So on the next slide, yeah, I've just included some tips, in how to deal with lack of audit evidence. So first is you perform an analysis and assess the effects of the incomplete information. So if we see that the incomplete information really affects or really distorts our assessment in that control that we are testing, we have to disclaim that assertion and inform its reliability, meaning to say we have to disclose this information in our audit report. Usually how we do that is that at the face of the report we do the disclaimer that we are not able to assess this particular risk area because of the lack of evidence. And then we detail kung ano yung mga lacking evidence na we need pa to know or we need pa to obtain before we can say na we have come up with a sound assessment of this particular process area or audit area or risk area. So that's how we do that. So that's how we deal with that. Okay? So hindi natin pwedeng ipilit na hindi, pwede na yan. Pag meron na meron, parang ganun. So we have to really assess if you see or if you can really say na it distorts our judgment for that particular na assessment or process area, we have to really opt out of it. We have to really say na hindi talaga kami makakapagbigay ng assessment dito because the evidence is lacking, yan. So that's how we deal with lack of evidence. So I think the next will be a short